I'm so mad at her, I'm ready to kill her. I growled angrily, taking another sip of my beer. Hey, Johnny, don't even say things like that, Billy said, which was kind of funny because Billy had a hotter temper than I did. He was always getting into fights in high school, and the smallest thing could set him off. But she's cheating on me, I whined. It seems like she's been sleeping with her doctor friend for a couple months now. How could she do this to me? Billy ordered us another drink, and when we were seated at the table, asked me to tell him what had happened. I didn't really want to go into details, but I felt strangely drawn to talk about it. Kind of like talking about the surgery, so I started at the beginning. I always thought Doris and I had a very good marriage. Sure, we fought about various things from time to time, what couple doesn't? But then we always kissed and made up, and that's all that matters. Money-wise, we had a pretty good life together. I dropped out of college my sophomore year. That academic stuff wasn't for me, but I really didn't need a degree because I'm a born salesman, as they say. Eventually, I got a job at one of the 2 largest car dealerships in town and was soon making good money. So, Doris and I got engaged when she was a freshman and married when she was a senior. The funny thing is, Doris got into sales too. After graduation, she went to work for one of the big pharmaceutical companies. Basically, that meant she sold prescription drugs to doctors. Anyway, we weren't rich or anything, but we were doing well. No kids yet, but that would come. At least I thought so. The first thing that attracted me to Doris was her figure. When I first met her, she was slim and trim. Even better, even after 6 years of marriage, she was still that way. Partly it was good genes, I think, but she also became obsessed with working out. She goes to the gym 3, 4, even 5 days a week. The good news is that her body was intense and sexy, not like that pumped-up bodybuilder that makes me nauseous, but more like that Jillian Michaels woman you see on TV all the time. I liked that a lot. But the bad news was that all that exercise seemed to really wear her out. Lately, when I wanted to enjoy that hot body in bed, all she wanted to do was sleep. But, as I had just found out, there was another reason she didn't want to do horizontal mambo with me. That reason was Morris Fisher, one of the doctors she regularly saw. I happened to stumble upon an affair between my wife and the good doctor. Despite being the smartest in our family, Doris is the type of person who is always forgetting things. I can't even count the number of times we had to look for her lost cell phone or go back somewhere to retrieve a purse she left behind. So it was not unusual for her to leave her laptop at home this morning when she left for work. But what was unexpected was the email I found in my mailbox titled, "It was so hot yesterday." Of course, I opened it immediately. In short, it became obvious that she and Dr. Fisher had been using email to set up meetings at the motel for months. Judging from the content of other emails I'd read, it was pretty obvious that they weren't meeting to compare the relative merits of different medications. As I dug through her mail and saw what she was saying to him, it also became clear that this was much more than a casual connection. They were both in the midst of a full-blown affair. "I didn't expect this," I moaned pitifully to Billy. "What am I supposed to do, man?" "Well, if it was my wife, I'd give her a fist sandwich right before I kicked her to the curb," Billy said smugly. "No, I could never hit Doris," I said. "I'd just have to divorce her and go on with my life, but I'd really like to get back at Dr. Morris Fisher for ruining my marriage." As I sat there drinking, an idea popped into my head. I leaned across the table and quietly said to Billy, "Hey, buddy, would you help me get a little revenge? I think I know how we could make it so it doesn't affect us." Billy's eyes sparkled. "Tell me what you came up with," he said impatiently. My idea was simple. We'll use Doris's email to lure the good doctor back to the motel, only we'll be the ones waiting, not her. We'll tie him up, take his clothes, and leave him there in his underwear. Then we'll call the TV news to film him when the police rescue him. That will show the world his true colors. "But he'll know we did it," Billy protested. "I've got it all figured out," I assured him. "We'll be wearing ski masks and surgical gloves so we won't leave fingerprints. It'll be perfect." "Okay, smartass, but you're forgetting one thing," Billy said. "If he gets a letter from your Doris, he'll know you sent it." "Maybe," I agreed. "But even if he did, I don't think he'll say anything. If he does, he'll have to admit that he's been having an affair, and I'll bet his wife won't be too happy about that." Billy looked at me shrewdly. "You might be right, Besides, he might suspect you, but he won't be able to prove anything. Especially if I delete the email from Doris's computer after I send it, I said triumphantly. Go ahead, Billy said. I hate fucking cheaters. That goddamn doc owes you for screwing your wife. All right, here's how we're gonna do it. Tonight, I'll email him from Doris's computer and set up a meeting at their usual motel right after dinner. Tomorrow morning, you go and book a room. When he shows up, we'll grab him. And then we'll cut off his sweet spot, right? Billy asked impatiently. No, I said hastily. We don't want to get caught. We'll gag him, strip him naked, tie him to a chair and leave him. I'll make an anonymous call to the police about the disturbance in the room, and you call your buddy at the TV station and tell him that the police are investigating something serious at the motel. It'll be all over the news. He'll be the laughingstock of the whole town. If he keeps his mouth shut, he'll still be very embarrassed because everyone will know he's been hiding out in the hotel. And if he tells them why he went to the motel in the first place, they'll know about his affair with Doris, and then I'll throw her out. That sounds perfect, Billy said eagerly. I can't wait. Just remember one thing, Billy, I added. When you rent this room, don't use your credit card. Why not? I tried not to roll my eyes. Because you don't really want the police to know who rented the room where the doctor was captured, I said impatiently. Well, yeah, Billy said. I shook my head mentally. Billy was a great guy, but he wasn't going to get the Nobel Prize anytime soon. That night, when I got home, I acted as if nothing had happened. I even hinted to Doris that I'd like to have a little fun in bed after dinner, but she quickly dismissed the idea as I expected. I didn't know if it was Fisher tiring her out or if she was so fixated on him that she didn't want me to touch her. Either way, I would dump this cheating bitch as soon as I got my revenge on her lover. After she went to bed, I found her wheeled suitcase, the same one she used to roll all her drug samples and shit for the doctors. Of course the laptop was inside. When I fired it up, I found that the email was password protected, but I expected that. Because of her forgetfulness, Doris kept passwords written down on a piece of paper stuffed in her wallet. I pulled out the piece of paper, typed in the password, and bingo, in. I quickly began typing my little invitation to my love doctor, and I was pretty sure I knew how to express it in a way he couldn't resist. But halfway through, I stopped abruptly. We had a big problem. Billy was going to get a motel room tomorrow, but I needed to know right now what number to give the good doctor. Way to go, dumbass, I cursed myself. No Nobel Prize for you this year either. I quickly called Billy. When he came to the phone, I asked, Can you talk? Of course I can, he replied. Can't you hear me? No, I almost shouted. I mean, can you talk without Phyllis hearing you? Oh, he said. She's not here, you say. When I explained my dilemma, Billy said, Just make an anonymous call to the doctor tomorrow and tell him the room number. Yeah, that'll work, I said sarcastically. Don't you think he might get suspicious if some man called him and told him where to meet my wife for a little fun? Yeah, Billy said, and I stifled a groan. And then it hit me. I got it, I said impatiently. When you go to the motel tomorrow, get a room for 2 days. Then I'll text the doctor tomorrow night about the appointment for the next day and which room to go to. Okay, but what are we going to do with the room tomorrow? We won't do anything, I said, trying to contain my irritation. Well, I think it's a waste of time, Billy said. Besides, I don't think my credit card can afford 2 days. No credit cards, Billy, I shrieked, then clamped my hand over my mouth because I didn't want to wake Doris. Look, Billy, if you're short on money, I'll give it to you, but only in cash, not credit cards. Don't forget, pay in cash. He agreed, but I got a bad feeling about it. Nevertheless, Billy did as I told him and called me back the next day with the room number. It's not a problem, Johnny. The desk clerk didn't even look at me, and I paid cash as we agreed. And get this, we have room 101. It's at the very end, so it should be very quiet. Sounds great, buddy. You're good. I'll send that email tonight, and you take what we agreed. What else, Johnny? I let out a deep sigh, but I managed to keep my composure. Duct tape in your camera, I reminded him. I'll get surgical gloves and ski masks for us. Oh yeah, he said. Hanging up the phone, I cursed quietly. If he said, "Oh yeah," one more time, I swear I'd scream. Doris went to bed early again, so I had no problem sending a message to Dr. Fisher. In the letter, I promised him hot sex like he'd never had before, just so long as he showed up in room 101 at the motel at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. "I'm going to knock you down," I wrote, and that phrase made me laugh all night. When the big day came, things didn't seem so funny to me anymore. I began to wonder if I was going to do something really stupid. But when I remembered all those love letters between the two cheaters, my anger flared up again. Dr. Fisher deserved all the humiliation he was about to suffer, and so did Doris, for that matter. I was a faithful husband who had been treated unfairly. They deserved what was coming to them. Around noon, I called Billy on his cell phone to make sure everything was ready. He was to come to the dealership at 12:30 and pretend to be a customer so I could take it for a test drive. It was our Legend, and I wanted to make sure everything was in order. "Where are you, Billy? Are you home?" "No, I spent the night in a motel room," he replied nonchalantly. "What?" I yelled. "Why'd you do that?" "Well, I thought it was a shame to leave it empty. Besides, Phyllis and I had a fight, and I needed to get out of the house." Again, all I could do was shake my head. Billy's wife was a pretty little nurse who worked at the hospital. Doris knew her because they both worked out at the same gym. As far as I could tell, Phyllis seemed like a nice woman, but she and Billy were always fighting about something. Still, I didn't like the idea of him leaving all the evidence in the motel room. I watched the forensics team and knew what they might find. "Billy," I said sternly, "I thought we agreed that we didn't want to leave any traces in the room." "Well, we did," Billy said, and I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. "Look, Billy, clean up your mess, wipe up everything you've touched, and then go to the car dealership. Remember, you have to be here at 12:30 sharp." Despite my misgivings, Billy arrived at the showroom at 12:30 sharp. I signed up for the demonstrator and we rushed to the motel. When we got there, I handed Billy a pair of surgical gloves and pulled on my own. Then we went into the room. It was a mess, just as I expected. At first, I was afraid that Fisher might show up early, but when was a doctor ever on time? Anyway, working together, we did our best to get everything in order before he showed up. Billy and I closed all the blinds and curtains in the room, and then I turned off all the lights. The last thing I did was to adjust the little latch so the door would stay slightly ajar. Then we pulled on our ski masks and retreated around the corner. It was very dark, except for the light seeping in from under the door. While we waited in silence, Billy surprised me when he leaned over and whispered in my ear, "It's really creepy in here." It took all my strength not to strangle him. "Shh, Billy," I hissed. "He could be outside right now." "Oh, right." Before I could answer, we heard footsteps in the hallway. I shushed Billy and pointed to the camera in his hand. He nodded, and I hoped that meant he remembered what he had to do. I looked out from around the corner. At that moment, the door swung open and a man entered the room. "Hey, Doris, where are you, sexy lady?" he called out playfully. I nudged Billy to get ready. "I'm here," I said in a whisper, and as he turned in our direction, Billy turned on the camera. The flash hit the doctor right in the face, and he cried out as the bright light blinded him. I waited until he stopped rubbing his eyes, and when he dropped his hands, I punched him. I'm a pretty big guy, and I've had to fight, so I knew how to hold my own. I must have added a little extra to that punch, because Doc collapsed to the mat with a stone. I started dancing around, waving my aching fist. "It hurts like hell," I moaned. Luckily, Billy was all business. He made sure the room door was closed and locked, then went back to check on his lover. He whistled. "You really nailed him, Johnny," he said admiringly. He turned off like a light. "Hush," I hissed, "and don't call me by my name." "I'm sorry, Johnny." "Come on," I commanded. "Help me get his clothes off." We took off our ski masks and tried to undress the doctor. You'd be surprised how hard it is to undress a limp body, but after a lot of tugging, we stripped the doctor down to his blue-striped boxers. Neither of us wanted to touch his intimate parts, so we stopped. Then we sat him in a chair and duct-taped him down. Even though he seemed unconscious, I didn't want to risk him waking up and screaming, so I also taped his mouth shut. "Okay," I said, "we're done. Let's throw his clothes in the dumpster in the parking lot, and then we'll go back to the car dealership." "You sure you don't want to cut that bastard's sweet spot off?" Billy asked, pulling a sinister-looking folding knife out of his pocket. "Put that away, Billy," I said hastily. "We've already talked about this. All we want to do is humiliate him, not mutilate him." "Okay," Billy said, and to my relief, put the knife away. We gathered the rest of the doctor's clothes and headed for the door. As we left, I used the metal latch to keep the door from closing. "Why did you do that?" Billy asked. "So the police and reporters could easily get into the room," I told him. "Well, yeah," Billy said. I sighed nervously, and we headed toward the back door of the motel. On the way back to the car dealership, I tossed the doctor's clothes, gloves, and ski masks into the dumpster. When we got back, Billy climbed into his pickup truck to drive away. I leaned over to him to make sure he remembered what to do next. "I'm going to make an anonymous call to 911 and report the disturbance at the motel. As soon as you get home, call your buddy at the TV station. Tell him you just saw the police pull up to the motel and it looked like something serious had happened." He nodded, and I could only hope he got it right. The test drive I'd had with Billy had lasted a little longer than usual, but no one had said anything about it. I mentally breathed a sigh of relief. It looked like we'd gotten away with it. The rest of the day seemed to drag on forever, but finally the day was over and I hopped in the car to head to the bar to meet Billy. I was so strung out that I felt almost high. The thought of seeing the good doc being led out of a dirty motel in just his underwear on the 10 o'clock news almost made me drool. It would be even better to see Doris's face as she watched it with me. Billy, of course, was already sitting at the table, waiting for me with a beer. "Well," I asked impatiently, "did you call your buddy like we agreed?" "Yeah," he said, and took a big gulp from the bottle. "Did the reporters catch the doctor leaving the motel on tape?" "Sure did." "Well, what did your friend say? What did Fisher look like?" Billy just shook his head. "Hard to tell in a body bag." "A body bag? What body bag?" "The body bag the doctor was in." I stared at him in horror. "He was dead, Johnny," Billy said. "He had to be carried out in the bag." "How is that possible, Billy? He was all right when we left, except for a bruise on his jaw." "Somebody must have come into the room after we left and finished him off, Johnny. When my buddy called me back to thank me for the tip, he said the maid found the doctor with his throat slit. There was blood everywhere. That's going to be the lead story on today's news. Up until now, the only time in my life I've ever felt stupefied was when I took a really big lick playing soccer in high school. But then, I felt like I was about to faint. The worst thing that could ever happen." I took a big sip of beer to calm myself down and stared at Billy. "Do the police know who did it?" "Nope," Billy answered calmly. "My buddy said nobody saw or heard anything." "Look, Billy, this is bad, really bad. We could be in real trouble." "Why?" he asked. "We didn't kill him." "You and I know that, but the police don't know that," I said irritably. "If they find out we tied him up, they'll probably try to pin the murder on us." "Oh, yeah." I wanted to lean over the table and strangle him, but I knew now was not the time to lose control. "Look, Billy, we have to keep this a secret. You can't tell anybody. Not Phyllis, not your TV news buddy, not no. If you talk, we could go to jail. You understand?" "Sure, Johnny, sure. I really hope the police find whoever killed him right away. As soon as they make an arrest, we'll be out of danger." "Don't worry, Johnny, I'll keep my mouth shut," he said, making that stupid hand and mouth gesture we learned in 5th grade. I thought I was going to throw up. Going home, I could only pray that Billy would keep quiet, but I doubted he could hold out much longer. I was sure that if the cops ever took him in for questioning, we were doomed. Why the hell was I trying to get back at that bastard doctor? Why didn't I just file for divorce from Doris and leave it at that? Doris. Damn it. I was planning on confronting her tonight about her cheating. Well, now I'm going to have to let it go. I'll just have to go home and act fat, dumb, and happy with her. This hurts so bad. I hoped I could fake it well enough to fool her. When I got home, it was even worse than I expected. Before I could get in, Doris ran up to me and burst into tears. "What's the matter, honey? What's the matter?" "Oh, Johnny," she sobbed, "it's so awful. That sweet Dr. Fisher I've been talking to all the time has been murdered. It's all over the news." "I can't believe it," I said, trying to make my voice sound shocked and sympathetic. "What happened?" "They found his body in the motel room," she moaned. His throat had been slit. I know I shouldn't say this, but I couldn't help myself. "They found him in a motel room? It looked like he was going to meet someone for a little afternoon pleasure." "You don't know him," she snapped back. "Anyway, at a time like this, you need to put bad thoughts away." "I'm sorry, darling. I didn't mean to take such a terrible tragedy lightly," I said remorsefully. In fact, I was annoyed that I had to speak well of him. I didn't mean to kill him, but it didn't make me too sad. But what really put salt on my wounds was that I knew the real reason Doris was so upset. It went on like this all evening. Every time she came into the room, Doris's eyes were full of tears. When we watched the news, she hid her face in her handkerchief. It was nauseating, especially when the TV reporter started talking about what a terrible loss his death was to the community. It shouldn't be like this, I thought. They should be talking about what a despicable traitor he was, not extolling him to the skies. It's just not fair. Doris went to bed without even eating dinner, so I had to make myself a sandwich to keep from starving. But truth be told, I wasn't that hungry myself. In addition to the stress of having to pretend to be a caring husband around Doris, I was terribly anxious about what might happen next. Billy and I had tried to be careful, but what if we left some evidence behind? What would I tell the police if they came after me? Who would believe that we tied Fisher up but didn't hurt him except for that light punch to the jaw? After a sleepless night, I went to work the next day, but it wasn't any easier. Dr. Fisher had bought cars from us before, and his murder was the topic of conversation. Everyone had their own theory about who did it and why. I wondered if I could offer some alternative theory in hopes of confusing people. But I couldn't think of anything. In the end, I decided to keep quiet in the hope that it would all go away quickly. When I met Billy at the bar that night, it was obvious he was eager to see me. "You'll never guess that I found out about the doctor's murder," he greeted me loudly as I approached the table. "Shut up, Billy," I hissed. "I don't think we're going to talk to anyone about this." "Sure, but you need to hear this. My buddy found out something the police haven't told anyone yet." Despite my nervousness, I couldn't help my curiosity. "So what is it?" He leaned across the table to me. "When the police found his body, the killer had carved the word whore into his chest. They think it was a revenge killing." "Wow, that was a shock." I leaned back in my chair and tried to think through the implications. "There's more to it than that. The cops are pretty sure the killer is a man. They don't think a woman would have been strong enough to knock him out, strip him down, and put him in a chair. They think it would take a pretty big guy to do all that." That last bit of news made me dizzy. "Oh, God, Billy, now I'm in. If they ever link us to this case, I'll probably end up in the electric chair." "But you didn't do it," Billy protested. "Yes, but how can I prove it? I had motive, I fit the description, and I had opportunity. All they're missing is the murder weapon." "I used to watch real crime shows on TV," Billy said. "You probably threw away the murder weapon." "Billy, that doesn't help me. I didn't do it, did I?" "Oh, yeah." If I was scared last night, it was worse tonight. Hell, if I looked at all the evidence, even I'd think I was guilty. The only positive was that tomorrow was my day off, and I didn't have to listen to all this endless speculation about murder, but that didn't help me sleep any easier. The next day, Doris went to the gym, probably to try to chase away her sadness with exercise. I decided to try to take my mind off my worries for a while by doing some yard work. It was a beautiful day, and the lawn definitely needed mowing, so I stripped down to my old shorts and got to work in the yard. As I was cutting the grass, a car pulled up in front of our house, and an attractive young woman got out. She moved toward me, and I quickly shut off the engine of the mower. "Is your wife home?" she asked, looking me over carefully. "No, I'm sorry," I told her with a smile. "You just missed her. I'm her husband, Johnny. I'm alone." She reached into her purse and pulled out a card. "I'm Detective Monica Ferguson. Could you ask her to call me when she gets back? I'd like to ask her some questions about Dr. Morris Fisher." I was trembling with fear. "Why do you want to talk to your wife about him?" I asked too hastily. The detective smiled and patted my hand. "Don't worry," she said. "We're just trying to talk to everyone who had contact with Dr. Fisher. His office staff told us that your wife is a pharmaceutical rep and visited him regularly." "Oh, yes," I said. "Damn," I thought. "That sounds just as stupid as what Billy said." As I mentally berated myself, she continued to look at me appraisingly, and I wondered if she was flirting with me or assessing my criminal potential. Finally, she asked, "Did you know Dr. Fisher?" "Of course I knew him," I said, and immediately realized what I had said. "I mean, I knew of him through Doris, but I had never met him." She looked at me a little longer and then said, "Don't forget to ask your wife to call me." Then, as she was about to leave, she was quiet and added, "See you later." I stared at her as she walked away. Why the hell did I say I knew Fisher? I asked myself. I wondered if that sounded suspicious. And what did she mean by "see you around"? Needless to say, the peace and tranquility I had achieved by working in the yard was long gone. That night on the local evening news, there was an interview with the police chief about the Fisher murder. "We've uncovered important new evidence and hope to make an arrest soon," he said pompously. My blood pressure was trying to climb Everest. I couldn't wait to meet Billy and find out if his buddy knew anything about this. Before we even sat down at the table, I started bombarding my friend with questions. "The chief's bluffing," Billy said firmly. "My buddy says they don't have anything new. They're just hoping to get someone out of hiding. But the CSI guys have had plenty of time to comb the motel room with a fine-toothed comb. Maybe they found something." My friend says that so many guests stayed in that room, and it was cleaned so often that they didn't find anything useful, Billy said. Then a concerned expression appeared on his face. "You don't look well, Johnny. You've got to calm down a bit. Don't let that thing get to you." "Easy for you to say," I snapped back. "You didn't have a police detective come to your house yesterday." "Was it a woman named Monica?" he asked. When I nodded in surprise, he continued. "Yes, the same one was at the hospital. She even talked to Phyllis. They have nothing. They're just grasping at straws." As I left the bar, I kept thinking about what Billy had said. How could he be so calm when I was going crazy with worry? How could he be so sure that his buddy really knew the whole story? Eventually, I came to the conclusion that Billy's optimism was in direct contrast to his IQ. And since I'd sneaked a peek at his IQ score file before he was expelled from school, the thought scared the hell out of me. After another sleepless night and several handfuls of antacids, I realized I had to do something about it. There's no way I'm holding out until the police catch the killer, especially since the one they're most likely to catch is me. My only hope of saving my neck is to try to find the real killer myself. The only problem with this plan was that I had no idea how to conduct a murder investigation. Sure, it looked easy on TV, but how would I do it in real life? Think, I convinced myself. Okay, I have to assume that whoever killed the doctor knew him. It seemed unlikely that a complete stranger would wander into a motel room and kill a doctor strapped to a chair. What about that hooker carved into Fisher's chest? If that's a random act, I'm willing to eat my hat. So the question was, who besides me wanted to kill Dr. Fisher? No. Wait. I didn't want to kill the doctor. I just wanted to humiliate him. It was someone else who really wanted him dead, but who? Since I didn't know Fisher, I would have to talk to someone who did know him to get an answer to that question. And the best source I could think of was his wife. Perhaps she could suggest who might have had a grudge against her late husband. So now all I had to do was find a way to get her to talk to me, a complete stranger. I'll admit what I did next was really stupid, but I was getting more desperate by the minute and couldn't think of anything else to do. So the next weekend I went to the store and bought myself a toy detective badge painted gold. It would never stand up to close inspection. All I could hope for was a bluff. Besides, I'd seen someone do something similar in a movie that was based on true events. So maybe it would work in my case. So I put on a suit and tie and drove to the late Dr. Fisher's house. It was quite impressive, as one would expect from a successful physician. I sat in the circular driveway for a minute, trying to muster up the courage to go see the doctor's wife. I knew the chances of her talking to me were slim. The chances of finding out anything important were even slimmer, even if I managed to talk to her. But I also knew for sure that I didn't want to go to jail and become Bubba's boyfriend, so I finally walked up and rang the doorbell. The woman who opened the door reminded me of cut flowers that had been in a vase for too long. The beauty was still there, but I could see it was fading fast. I also saw the glass of whiskey she held in her hand. That didn't make her look any better either. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Fisher. I'm a detective." I handed her my badge. "Another one?" She interrupted me. "Well, I hope you're a good cop." What?" I asked. "Isn't that what you do? The woman I was talking to the other day was definitely a bad cop, so I hope you're a good cop." Well," I mumbled, stammering. "It's okay," she said. "Come on in," and gestured for me to come in. "Would you like to have a little whiskey and soda with me?" she asked, leading me into her room. "No thanks," I said. "I'm on duty." "Well, there's no sense in wasting whiskey," she said, and began to mix herself another. It wasn't her first dose of the day, judging by her wobbly gait. When she came back and sat down, I opened the little notebook I'd bought to make myself look official. "First of all, Mrs. Fisher, let me express my condolences on the tragic death of your husband." Yes, he's dead. Let's get on with it," she said impatiently. I was so surprised by her behavior that I couldn't help myself. "If you don't mind, Mrs. Fisher, you don't seem to be mourning his passing very deeply," I ventured. "Mourning? Hell, I'm celebrating," she muttered, taking another sip of whiskey. "My late husband cheated on me, Detective. As far as I'm concerned, he got what he deserved." I wondered if she knew about Doris, but I decided it wouldn't be smart to ask. Still, I was curious about her attitude. "Well, if he was cheating on you, why didn't you just divorce him?" "I couldn't afford it," she replied nonchalantly. "I signed a prenup when we got married. In a divorce, I was walking away with what I brought to the marriage. No, the truth is, someone finished the bastard off, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me." I blinked in surprise. Wow, if anyone was going to blame herself for the murder, it was her. But if she was done with her hubby, why would she say something like that, especially to a cop? Maybe she had more to drink than I thought, or maybe she was innocent and extremely naive. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I decided to ask her about the other suspects. "Mrs. Fisher, do you know anyone who might have had a motive for killing your husband?" I asked. "Oh, of course," she replied nonchalantly, "and more than one." "Really?" I asked in surprise. "Of course, it could have been any of the husbands of the wives he slept with," she said nonchalantly. "My late husband just couldn't keep his pants zipped. He cheated on me many times over the years. I wouldn't be surprised if a jealous husband decided to seek revenge." She shook her head bitterly. "My Morris was a real whore," she said. I almost gasped out loud when she said it. The fact that she'd said the word whore didn't strike me as a coincidence, but while it was suspicious as hell, it still wasn't a confession. Besides, she'd just given me a few other possible suspects to check out. This detective game was getting more and more complicated. "Do you know who his mistresses were?" I asked, somewhat nervously, wondering if she would name Doris. "I have no idea," she replied. "After I caught him cheating the first time, I didn't care. Damn it, there goes that clue. But weren't you afraid he might fall in love with one of them and leave you? Like I said, Morris just couldn't be faithful to me, or anyone else. But I always knew he would stay with me because he liked the image of the happily married man he was creating in society. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. What a lousy marriage." "What about the disease? Weren't you afraid he'd catch it or something?" She smirked. "He was a doctor. Even if he did get something, he knew how to cure it. Besides, once I realized what was going on, I stopped sleeping with him. I hadn't been with a man in a long time." She set down her glass and gave me a long, appraising look. "You know, you're a pretty good-looking guy. How would you like to end a girl's long drought?" With those words, she quickly slid off the couch onto her knees, moved over to me, and to my surprise, began fiddling with my zipper. No, wait, Mrs. Fisher, I mean, I'd love to, but I'm happily married. And then I stopped. I was no longer a happily married man. In fact, I was planning on being single altogether in the near future. The idea of getting a little revenge on my wife and lover even after his death seemed pretty damn appealing. And since I hadn't had sex in quite some time either, I suddenly felt a damn thrill. I stopped resisting. I hadn't had sex in a long time. Too long, I realized. And this woman knew what she was doing. She rotated her hips, rocked them back and forth, and then started bouncing up and down again. For a not-so-young girl, she had plenty of energy. I was in heaven and knew I wouldn't last long. Leaning back on the back of the couch, I hoped the neighbors hadn't heard us, or they might have called the police to report another murder. After a couple of minutes, Mrs. Fisher leaned back and looked at me with grateful eyes. "Oh, baby, that was so good. I didn't realize how much I missed it." I looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "How the hell did you learn to do what you did with me? It was incredible." She smiled and winked at me. "I may be a little older than you, sweetie, but I haven't forgotten all the tricks I've learned over the years." She reached out and grabbed a couple cocktail napkins, which she handed me to wipe myself off. After doing the same to herself, she stood up and poured herself another. "Do you want one right now?" she asked. "No," I said. "I need to get back, to the station." She looked at me lazily as I pulled up my pants and zipped up my zipper. "That was a lot of fun," she said. "We should do it again. Hey, what did you say your name was?" I was starting to get nervous. "I didn't," I said, heading for the door. "Oh," she said nonchalantly. "Well, call me anyway." With those words, I slipped out the door and hurried to my car. As I drove away, I felt a sense of satisfaction at the unexpected interlude I'd enjoyed, but my mood quickly darkened when I thought about everything she'd said to me before jumping on me. If Dr. Fisher really was such a lover of married women, he could very well be the victim of a jealous husband. It seemed like a promising avenue of investigation. There could have been a few guys out there with a motive. But how the hell am I going to investigate them if I don't know who the doctor's other mistresses are? If anything, the more potential suspects there are, the harder it will be for me to narrow down the list. Then I thought about Mrs. Fisher. Although I found her to be an experienced and enthusiastic lover, I couldn't help but wonder if she could also be a cold-blooded killer. If she saw the email invitation to her husband to come to the motel, she could wait until Billy and I left and then sneak in and take her revenge. That way, she could inherit her husband's property while they blamed us. I had to admit, it was pretty slick, if she really was a murderer. But if she killed her husband, why would she tell her motives to the detective? It seemed like a really stupid thing to do. But what if she's more devious than she seems? What if she deliberately revealed the information about the prenup to throw me off the trail? For that matter, was she really just a lustful widow? Or did she screw me over to distract me? The more I thought about everything, the more my head started to hurt. Thank God it was time to meet Billy. I needed someone to talk things over with. Over a cold drink, I told Billy what I'd learned from Mrs. Fisher. "My problem," I told him, "is that now I have more potential suspects and I don't know what to do with them. How am I ever going to find the real killer?" "Well," Billy voiced his opinion, "if you knew who it was, I bet you could make a lot of money." I looked at him in confusion. "What are you talking about, Billy?" "It's very simple," he said. "I bet the real killer would pay you almost anything to keep you from turning you into the police." "It's blackmail, Billy. We've got enough problems without the blackmail charge." "Oh, yeah." But instead of being angry with Billy, I started thinking about his offer. "Wait a minute," I said. "Maybe it's not such a bad idea." "I saw it on TV once. All we have to do is make it clear that we know who did the dirty deed and that we need money to keep quiet about it. And then, when someone shows up to make the deal, we'll catch the real killer." "Wow, that's very clever, Johnny," Billy said. Then his smile disappeared. "But how are you going to report this killer if you don't even know who he is?" "I think I know a way," I said smugly. How did the killer even know we were going to meet Dr. Fisher at the motel? From what I understand, he, or she, I said, thinking of Mrs. Fisher, must have seen the fake letter I sent from Doris's address. So we'll just send another one in the same way and see who takes the bait. But how will Dr. Fisher get the letter, Johnny? He's dead. I sighed. I know Dr. Fisher is dead, Billy, but his killer is alive, and he's the one we need. He'll see the new letter just like the old one, and when he shows up, we'll get him. You're a genius, Billy praised me, and for once I had to agree with him. I decided to put my plan into action immediately. On the way home from the bar, I stopped at an ATM to get some cash. Then I drove to a motel and got a room for 2 days. The receptionist was a bored teenager who was so engrossed in watching TV that he barely looked at me. On a hunch, I decided to ask for room 101 again. The killer will flinch when he sees that, I grinned to myself. The next morning, I got up very early so that I would have time to send a message from Doris's address before she woke up. I spent quite a bit of time composing it, and I was very proud of my work. I know who you are and what you did to that slut Fisher. If you don't want me to go to the police, you'd better come to the same room in the same motel where Dr. Fisher died. Be there at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon and bring $20,000 cash with you. Or else. That should be enough, I thought. I pressed send and then deleted the sent message from Doris's computer, just like last time. The trap is set, I said to myself. Now let's see who bites. I went to work as usual, but I was having trouble concentrating. I kept wondering who would show up in the motel room tomorrow. I realized I might not even know the person, especially if he was one of the angry husbands. By the time I finished work and went to the bar, I was dying to talk things over with Billy and get his reaction. But Billy wasn't there, and even though I waited for almost an hour, he never showed up. That made me really nervous. Billy was always up for a beer. What could have happened to him? As I drove home, my paranoia continued to grow. What if Billy had been picked up by the police? What if he told them everything we'd done? What if they were waiting outside my house to arrest me? I was so consumed with my fears that I made it home before I even realized where I was. Fortunately, no one was waiting for me there. Not even Doris had come home yet. It was only a few minutes later that I heard Doris pull up, and by the time she entered the house, I was already her loving husband. But it didn't really matter what I looked like because she was flustered. "You'll never guess what happened today," she said excitedly. "Your friend Billy is hiding from the law." I thought my heart would stop, but Doris didn't even notice. He and Phyllis had a big fight, and he gave her a black eye. She called the police, and he drove off in an unknown direction. Oh my God, I thought, if they catch him and start asking about Dr. Fisher, we're screwed. But Doris continued to babble on about the situation and didn't notice my panic. To hide my emotions, I pretended to wonder what she was talking about. "Why did they fight anyway?" I asked when I had a chance to get a word in edgewise. "The girls at the gym told me that Billy thinks Phyllis is cheating on him," she said, and I mentally shook my head in confusion. Are there really no more faithful wives left? I wondered. The thought reignited my anger at Doris, and I said angrily, "Well, if she cheated, then so be it." I thought Doris would lash out at me for that little remark, but she didn't respond. It only made me even more angry. "What hypocrisy!" I thought. "You're the vilest liar I know, but if I lifted a finger at you, you'd get a hell of a kick out of it." But for now, I kept my thoughts to myself. I didn't say anything more to Doris at dinner, and then I went into the study to think about the latest developments. Suddenly, a terrifying thought struck me. What if Billy is the killer? I remembered the folding knife he had with him when we tied up the doctor. What if Billy sneaked back and finished off the doctor after we left the motel because Phyllis was cheating on him? I didn't want to believe it, but it all made some terrible sense. Then an even more horrible thought occurred to me. What if Billy decides to show up at the motel tomorrow? I'm bigger than him, but I'm not sure I could overpower him in a fight, especially if he brings a knife. I decided I'd better bring some extra protection with me, so I went down to the basement and got my gun out of there. I hadn't fired it in a while, but it seemed to be okay. The next morning, I went to work as usual, except I had my gun in my car. After lunch, I told the manager that I needed to rest for the rest of the day. He didn't like that, but I'm one of his top salesmen, so there wasn't much he could do. I left the car dealership and arrived at the motel a half-hour early. Slipping the gun into my jacket pocket, I walked to the room and opened the door with my card. I almost locked the door behind me, but at the last minute I remembered that I wanted the killer to be able to get in, so I put the latch on the door. Then I settled into the chair and prepared to wait. Sitting there, I looked around the room. It was obvious that they had put down new carpet. There must have been too much blood on the old one, I thought with a shudder. Even the chair I was sitting on looked new, and I figured it had to be changed too. Otherwise, it looked the same as last time. That didn't make me feel any better. I didn't want to think about it anymore, so I started thinking through my list of suspects. The first was Mrs. Fisher. She had a huge motive, but I had a hard time believing it was her. After all, she had put up with so much from her husband for so long. It's hard to understand why she suddenly decided to do something so drastic. Still, perhaps she had reached her limit. And don't forget, I told myself, she's the one most likely to have access to Dr. Fisher's email account. Then came the husbands of the other women who were Dr. Fisher's mistresses. I didn't know who they were or how many there might be, but one of them could have been the abusive type. He might have been stalking the doctor, waiting for the right moment. How he could have accessed the doctor's email, I didn't know, but if he did, he could realize that we had given him the perfect opportunity for revenge. Then I thought about Billy. I hoped with all my heart it wasn't him, but I had to admit he was a good suspect. I knew he had a temper, and to be honest, there was something mean about him too. I never would have thought Billy could fool me, but maybe he was smarter than I thought. It seemed unlikely, but I couldn't rule it out. At that moment, I heard a sound in the hallway and grabbed my gun. The door creaked open, and a dim light from the hallway seeped into the room. Then, to my amazement, I heard a voice calling out, "Johnny! Johnny, are you there?" "Doris!" I exclaimed in surprise. "What are you doing here?" I reached out, turned on the light, and saw my loving wife enter the room, shaking her head in disgust. "I'm here to stop you from doing something really stupid, Johnny." "But how did you know I was going to be here?" I asked in confusion. She crossed her arms over her chest and started lecturing me in that schoolteacher tone I hate. "When I woke up yesterday morning, it was obvious that you were fiddling with my laptop. I checked my email and found nothing at first, but when I checked my deleted items, I saw your stupid email." "Damn, I should have thought of that." "There are a lot of things you should have thought about," she said angrily. "Maybe if you hadn't dropped out of college—" "Don't you dare insult me again," I said angrily. "Besides, I'm the one who has the right to be upset, not you. You cheated on me with your damn doctor friend. I caught you, and now I'm going to divorce your ass." She made a gesture with her hand like she was warding off a fly. "That's not important right now. What matters is what you're doing here. What exactly were you hoping to do with that ridiculous email you sent from my account?" I took offense at her reaction to the accusation of cheating, but I felt I had to defend myself. So I began to explain how Billy and I had lured Dr. Fisher here to embarrass him and then found out he'd been murdered. "We were afraid the police would think we did it," I told her, so I started looking for the real killer. I told her how I had pretended to be a detective to question Mrs. Fisher, and how I had gotten the idea to lure the real murderer here by pretending to be a blackmailer. Listening, Doris continued to sigh. Finally, she raised her hand to stop me. "Johnny, do you know Alexander Pope?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't think I've ever met him." She rolled her eyes. "Mr. Pope once said, 'A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or don't taste the Pierian spring.'" "What's a Pierian spring? What are you talking about, Doris?" "Nothing, Johnny, you wouldn't understand," she said, shaking her head in disgust. She took a deep breath and put her hands to her sides, and I realized that now it was going to start. "You've never been the brightest bulb, but this plan has to be the dimmest, dumbest thing I've ever heard. First of all, Fisher is dead. Why would anyone check a dead man's mailbox? Why would they even have access to it?" "Well, they could," I said defensively. "Anyway, I bet Mrs. Fisher had access to it." "That lush," Doris snorted. It's hard enough for her to find her way to a bottle of whiskey, let alone get into her husband's email account. Well, it doesn't matter anyway, I argued hotly, because I think the real killer did get the message. And who would that be, pray tell? She asked sarcastically. As much as I hate to admit it, I think the real killer was Billy. I think he found out Dr. Fisher was patting Phyllis on the butt. After he and I left Dr. Fisher here in the room, I think he came back and slit Fisher's throat. So I bet Billy's about to walk through that door, and that's why you need to get the hell out of here right now. Doris reached into her purse, pulled out a pair of surgical gloves, and started pulling them on. I knew she always carried them with her because of her job at the pharmaceutical company, but I couldn't figure out why she needed them now. Then she looked at me. I'm sure Billy won't be walking through that door anytime soon because the police arrested him today. The idiot went to the very bar where you guys hang out all the time, and the police were waiting for him there. Oh, wow. I was shocked. That's when I got excited. But maybe that means he'll confess to the police and let me off the hook, I added hopefully. Doris looked at me calmly. Is that the gun you keep in the basement? She asked. Yes, I said, caught off guard. Can I see it? She asked, holding out her hand. Of course, I said, holding it out to her. She examined it carefully, checking to see if it was loaded and cocked. Then she looked at me. Despite your theory, I don't think you need to worry about what Billy will tell the police. Why wouldn't I be? I asked. Because Billy didn't kill Morris Fisher. How do you know that? Simple, because I killed him. You did? Why would you kill him? You were in love with him, I almost screamed. Exactly, she said bitterly. I did love him, and he said he loved me too. He promised to take me away from you and your stupid friends. He was going to marry me and show me all the finer things in life. But then I found out that he was sleeping with Phyllis and that he had no intention of marrying me. She paced back and forth, waving the gun to emphasize her words. I didn't know what to do until I heard you on the phone with Billy about renting a motel room. When I found your first letter, it was pretty easy for me to figure out your ridiculous plan to humiliate Morris. At first I wanted to warn him, but then I realized you'd given me an opportunity to get rid of both of you. So I waited until you and Billy left, and then I slipped into the room. Morris was so happy to see me he almost cried. But when I told him I'd found out about Phyllis, I saw the fear in his eyes. When I pulled out one of his own scalpels, he started to beg. And then he tried to scream when I carved the word slut into his chest, but you can't scream loudly through duct tape. When I finished marking him for the whole world to see who he was, I yanked his head back and cut his jugular vein and carotid artery in one blow. Even with all the gory details, her story still didn't make sense to me. I can't believe you'd do something like that, I protested. Besides, you cried and cried the night they announced his death on TV. Haven't you realized by now that women can cry on demand when they need to? She asked with a smirk. Then her eyes darkened. Haven't you ever read that, hell hath no fury like a woman abandoned? Oh, wait, of course you haven't read that, since the only thing you read is the sports page. She stopped abruptly and pointed the gun at me. But somehow those idiots on the police force didn't put you in jail for killing Fisher. And for all your clumsiness, you came too close to the truth for me to let you live. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to make it look like suicide by remorse in the same room where Morris died. I like the symmetry, she added with a chuckle. It's almost poetic. I'd never seen Doris like that, and it was quite a frightening sight. Who would have thought she could turn into a cold-blooded killer? And why did I give her my gun? What an idiotic move. I should have tried to talk her out of it. Wait a minute, Doris, I shouted desperately. You can't do that. One of the men who received the letter I sent could come through that door any minute. She laughed in my face. Here's a perfect example of why I have to do it. You're deadly stupid. Rest assured, Johnny, no one has seen your ridiculous letter, and no one is coming to save your stupid ass. That's where you're wrong, came a voice from the door. Drop the gun, or you're a dead woman. Doris turned around in surprise and saw Detective Monica Ferguson walking in with her gun at the ready. Right behind her stood a uniformed police officer, also with a gun. Doris stiffened, then dropped the gun with a curse, and all strength seemed to leave her. She fell to her knees and began sobbing, for real this time, I thought. Detective Ferguson looked over her shoulder at the officer and said, "Take the gun away and cuff him." The cop walked over and kicked the gun away, then quickly tied Doris's hands behind her back while the detective covered him. Only after he was done did Monica relax and take a deep breath. As for me, I was ready to collapse with relief. "Thank God you're here," I muttered. "Another minute or two more and I would have been dead." Then I looked at her in sudden confusion. "Wait a minute. Why are you even here?" Monica smiled at me. "We've had access to the late doctor's email account since he was killed. This morning, I happened to look in his inbox and noticed that he had a new email. I didn't know what to think when I read the message, but I definitely wanted to be here to see what would happen." I turned to Doris. "Well, I guess my little plan wasn't so stupid," I teased her. She looked at me angrily but said nothing. The policeman lifted Doris to her feet and led her to the police car. Monica and I followed, and as we walked, what she had said reached me. "If you had access to Dr. Fisher's email account, how come you didn't know about his affair with Doris?" Monica shook her head. "We didn't find out anything because Dr. Fisher was very secretive. Apparently he had a habit of erasing anything that came into the mailbox as soon as he read it. Maybe he was afraid his wife would find out." "Like she cares," I thought, remembering our little encounter. But I kept it to myself. No point in muddying the waters, I decided. As the policeman secured Doris in the back seat, I began to think about the future. "So what's going to happen to me now?" I asked Monica. She patted my arm encouragingly and grinned crookedly. "Well, that's up to the district attorney, of course, but I bet he won't even press charges against you. Dr. Fisher is dead, and now we know who really killed him. Under the circumstances, I doubt we can get an angry husband convicted on assault charges." "Well, whatever happened," I said, "if it weren't for you, I'd be dead by now. If there's anything I can do to repay you, just let me know." She gave me a long, slow look from head to toe, then gave me a wide smile. "When this is all over, I might have to stop by the car dealership where you work and see you. I was looking for something new, something to bring a little excitement into my life. Maybe you could help me with that." Then she winked at me, "And you don't have to be a Nobel Prize winner to know what that means."